And we welcome you to the 2019-2020 women's basketball season preview alongside Steve Zerdelian. I'm Tim McCaffrey. We begin with last year's NCAA tournament teams, and what better way to start with the 2019 regional champion, St. A's, Steve.
Yeah, St. Ansel for the first time ever winning the regional championship, and they have a lot of pieces back. The diminutive of Ryan, Steinman, and Messler provides the Hawks with a great core and an experienced core to begin with. But the one thing that St. Anselm does best, and what got them the regional championship, Tim, is they defend, and that's not going to change. So whether they end up repeating or not, they're going to be in the mix because A, they have upper class players who know how to win, and B, they defend.
I think you can make a case for just about every team that made the NCAA tournament last year, which makes this kind of unique. Last year's regional runner-up, Lemoyne Dolphins.
It is very unique. We've never had 8 teams repeat back-to-back years, and legitimately you can make a case for every team. Certainly for Lemoyne, you can make a case for them. One of the most dynamic players in the country is Michaela Roberts, and if you haven't seen her play, do yourself a favor, go see her play. The key for Lemoyne, though, is can they replace the interior presence of Corinne Patavian? If they can do that, they've got a lot of wing depth that will carry them through the season. They're another team, defends the heck out of the basketball. I do like the Dolphins, and they're certainly going to be a regional contender again, and a contender to defend their Northeast 10 title.
If Michaela isn't the player to watch in the region, it's Arissa Yee. Sciences lost in the regional semifinal a year ago, but they are led by Yee.
She's special. I mean, a player that can basically do everything on the floor and can play 40 minutes at a stretch. I mean, there were stretches where she just didn't come off the floor. For Sciences, they have to keep her on the floor. She's that important. They do have a good returning shooter in Jordan Vitelli, but because of injury issues, her time is limited. The question for Sciences is depth. They're going to have to rebuild some of those shooters and some interior players, whether it's new players or whether existing returning players do fill those gaps. Sciences, first of all, though, Sciences is a team that schedules extremely well out of the league, and that is going to help them down the stretch. It's what got them the number 1 seed last year and a chance to host. They are the favorite in the CACC, and they're certainly a favorite to go back to the NCAA Trentwood Field. How far they go will depend on how the depth develops.
Maybe a year ahead of schedule last year, the Stonehill Skyhawks lost in the regional semifinals. How do you think they fare this season?
I think it's pretty similar for Stonehill. There's a little more experience, which obviously helps. They have, I think, the best underclass player in the region in Kayla Raymond. They surround Raymond with a bunch of shooters as well. They have good depth. Interior play is the key for Stonehill. If they can hold their own in the paint, then their defense and their transition play usually sees them do well. I think another 20-win season and a return to the NCAA field is certainly a possibility for Stonehill. How those support players develop will dictate how far they go.
Yes, at Stonehill, everybody loves Raymond. At New York Tech, or NYIT, the New York Institute of Technology, now they've gone with a new name. Don't call them NYT, call them New York Tech, which was the name they didn't want you to call them before. So here we go. New York Tech still has a great women's basketball program.
I'm going to call them winners. For the first time ever last year, they won the East Coast Conference Championship. And stop me if you've heard this before, they defend.
Yes.
Another team that defends very well. Scoring does tend to be an issue for them. They do have a terrific inside player in Meg Dolmeyer. And on the perimeter, Shirley Frierson is among their better scorers. If they can get more consistent scoring, I think that their commitment to tempo and defense is going to help them in the long run, and they're in a good position to defend their ECC title.
The only team, believe it or not, that I don't have returning to the NCAA tournament was a team that lost in the first round last year and lost a lot of players, Jefferson. Unfortunately
for Jefferson, it is not quite a total rebuild, but there's a lot to fix there. There's only one starter back. They lost the terrific Jessica Kaminsky, who graduated last year, and unfortunately, they lost Caitlin Cunningham, their junior guard / wing player, who was poised to take over that mantle as the best player in the program. So, unfortunately for the Rams, you're looking at just one returning starter in a lot of Williams. Now, this does present opportunities for new players and players that were on the roster last year to fill those roles. They're going to have to do that if they're going to approach a 20-win season. I think they'll be competitive, and they'll probably, in the CACC, be pretty good. It depends. Obviously, there's a lot of question marks there with Jefferson if they can ascend to that level, again, depending on how the support players do.
Very quietly, Kim Lusk's ladies of St. Thomas Aquinas College have stabilized getting into the NCAA tournament. Can they get back, and can they advance out of the first round?
I don't see why they can't get back. The advancement is another question. This is a team that's won 53 games over the last 2 years, their best stretch in program history. Another team, Tim, that defends really well. scoring is also an issue for them, even though they do have some good players, the likes of Emily Preston and Ruth Adams. They control tempo really well. And they strangle their opponents defensively. They do that extremely well. That's what gets them victories, and they're very consistent in that. They're going to have to find ways to score some more points when they need it, because when things start to even out and two good teams are facing each other, you need to have that X factor that's going to push the pendulum in their direction. Whether they can develop that or not, I'm not so sure. But in terms of the ECC race and the NCAA tournament picture, they're definitely in that frame again.
Very interesting team Barb Stevens has this year. Can her squad make it back to the NCAAs?
Well, the NCAAs aren't the NCAAs without Bentley University there, it seems. They do lose their post player in Victoria Lux. They do lose point guard in Amy McConnell, but they still have good players returning. Katie Mergioli had a good season last year, and they do get a good Division I transfer, and Kari Brecky, who was an All-America East All-Rookie Team selection last year. But the ultimate key for Bentley is, and has been for the last couple of years, the health of Megan Lewis. When she's healthy and playing well with her size and her ability at both ends of the floor, changes everybody's role and makes Bentley a very, very good team. When she's not 100% and she's had a back injury that she's had to deal with for the last couple of years, that changes the equation. If they have a healthy Lewis, this is a team that can go all the way and get back to the Elite Eight. If she's not healthy, as we saw at the end of last year, enormous difficulty scoring, and that'll be the big question for the Falcons.
Let's take a look at the contenders in the 2019-2020 season preview, at least to the opinions of Steve Zerdelian and myself. University of New Haven.
New coach last year, and Debbie Buff changed the entire culture at UNH. That's definitely what they needed. She instilled a culture there. She instilled a defensive presence. They had difficulty scoring, and they lost their best scorer in Alexandria Kerr. Now, I think they're deeper this year, and the cohesion is going to be better because the program is now established. They're a tough team to play. You work hard to score against them. I think that'll be the case again this year. We'll have to see how players develop, if they can make up for that the loss of Kerr in terms of scoring. But they're going to be a solid team this year, and if things really develop, they could be a 20-plus win team.
Team that finished first last season in the CACC North Division. Team you've got on the contenders list. Talk about Dominican.
I like Dominican in a way. I mean, the division is not very good, but Dominican played pretty well. They've got a couple of good players in Jasmine G and Karina Guerra, so those are players that can make a difference. They have pretty good depth as well. And Bill Diener's Chargers are a team that, when they're making shots, they're pretty good. So the fact that they won the division last year, that they won 16 games, and they have a lot of players coming back, I think that puts them in a position to at least challenge for the NCAAs. The problem there is, though, the division and the league does not do teams any favors in terms of strength of schedule. They're going to have to get some good non-league wins if they're going to be in that consideration.
A team that was on the rise but far from making the NCAA tournament last year was the Damon Wildcats. Do they continue that trend, or do they slide back down the hill?
Damon was very interesting last year. They surprised everybody, sort of came out of nowhere after losing Sarah Saba, who was so great after a terrific career there. But Katie Titus was one of the best freshmen in the region last year. She had a terrific season, have decent depth. Now, though, they're a team that's going to be looked at as one of the top-tier teams or close to it, and so they're now going to be a little more the hunted than the hunter, and a little more is going to be expected out of them. Whether they can match up to that or not, we'll have to wait and see. I would comfortably right now put them third in the ECC, but they could be third with a bullet if they continue to develop as a unit and get some non-league wins that will help their resume. Then they could be in the frame. Two
teams that I think are actually similar in my mind. They're not similar, but I think they're going to end up similar spots in the regional rankings this year are Adelphi and Southern Connecticut. Take your pick. Let's start with Adelphi.
I like Adelphi better than Southern Connecticut simply because they have a lot more depth. They had plenty of talent last year, but for whatever reason, it never clicked together, and they didn't string together long winning streaks, and they just sort of hung around the fringe of the NCAA race. They won 15 games, but it felt like they just never really got themselves going in the right direction. Chemistry might be better this year. They do have some talented players, and I think just having some disappointment in their recent past the last 2 years is going to help push them forward. I like them, and I think they're going to be pushing Lemoyne all the way in the division.
How about Southern Connecticut?
Southern Connecticut has a terrific inside player in Kiana Steinauer. She's a 2015 player, led the country in rebounding last year. The problem for the Owls is they annually have no depth, and they lose players to injury, and all of a sudden you're looking at an 8-player roster. And whoever you are, those 8 are going to have to be really good to sustain a full season. Yeah. If they can develop some depth and some consistent scoring, then they may make a push at the top couple of spots in the NE10 Southwest. But with Steinauer, they have a chance regardless any night out.
And the last contender, Roberts Wesley.
When we talk about an individual player, Emily Miller is that player for Roberts Wesleyan. She's a terrific inside-out presence, has good size, can shoot the ball as well. It's the support players for Roberts Wesleyan. They took a step back last year. Had a losing record actually last year at 15 and 17. So they're going to need some players to develop around Miller. I make them a sleeper simply because of Miller's presence. There's a lot to be proven there, however.
Well, the word is sleeper because your official sleeper in that division in the ECC is
it's Malloy.
Yes.
A couple of reasons here. Number one is they had a lot of injuries last year. They're going to get some players back. They do have transfers and depth. Transfers and depth will help them this year. Joe Pelican is obviously a proven coach, and when he's got his team ready to go, they're another team that defends really well. They did have a transfer in Khadijah Dixon, who, if we remember a couple of years ago, was the ECC Rookie of the Year at Bridgeport, played last year at Clarion, playing as a graduate student now at Malloy, and Pelicans had success with graduate students coming back and playing there last year. So if she could be their primary offensive player and they stay healthy, this is a team that can shoot right up the standings in the ECC and give anybody trouble.
Give me your CACC sleeper, Steve Arena.
Well, I thought about this. I thought back and forth. There are a couple of possibilities here, but I'm going to go for Georgian Court, a team that finished third in the South Division last year, won 13 games, and they feel like they're on the rise. They surprised some teams last year, and there were a lot of close games that they played as well. Whether they're able to challenge Jefferson for second place, now that Jefferson is a little bit vulnerable because of the injury and graduation situation, they could. So they're a sleeper, but we'll just kind of have to see if they actually take that step over the line to become a contender.
Southern New Hampshire University is your NE10 sleeper. This is a team that I think some people might believe should be in the NCAA tournament. Why do you have them as a sleeper?
Well, don't sleep on them. Now, they did lose their best all-time player in Kylie Lorenzen.
Kind of a factor.
Usually, that means that a team takes a step backward. But there's something about this roster. There's a lot of talent there. They've got some good young players. They've got depth. They've got size. And now they don't have the expectations. At some point, somewhere along the line, this is going to be a team that goes from winning 16, 17 games to finally getting things going their way and winning 20. Now, the unfortunate part for the Penmen is they're in the Northeast Division in the NE10, which is as tough as it gets when you're looking at Bentley, Stonehill, and St. Anselm ahead of them last season, and Merrimack was ahead of them as well. So I just have a sneaking suspicion that they might overachieve based on the expectations this year, despite the departure of Lorenzen.
One of these years, Southern New Hampshire is going to go on the road and beat a quality team. And maybe beat multiple teams and all of a sudden be in the NCAA tournament mix, but they have to do that in their league because they don't challenge themselves with their non-league schedule. Let's take a look at the other teams, Steve, just to round out things. In the CACC, we have Caldwell, Post, Felician, Concordia, Bloomfield, Nyack, Goldie Beacom, Wilmington, Chestnut Hill, Holy Family, a lot of teams with really rough records last year. So what do you see?
Well, it wasn't a good year for the CACC overall. The North Division itself won only 11 non-league games, and until they improve that record, it's really hard to make a case for anybody being an at-large bid contender. Caldwell should be better than they were last year. They actually won 11 games, all of them in league play. Post is a team that has some good players, and I think they could surprise some teams if things come together. And even Felician, if they take a step forward, they could be better. There's a lot of change going on in the CACC South. Obviously, we talked about Jefferson. Holy Family has a new coach as well. Goldie Beacom had a pretty decent season, and they could be that team to ascend to third place in the division. Yeah. But there's honestly, Tim, there's a long road for all of those teams to get to the level of sciences in that league.
Love Goldie Beacom in the CAC, Steve. Love Post. I think Post can win the league. I'm not saying Goldie Beacom can win the CACC
You saying win the league or win the division?
Win the division. And I think Goldie Beacom, with just about everybody returning, barring the unforeseen, they should be able to finish second and be an NCAA tournament contender. Let's take a look at the ECC teams we haven't mentioned so far: Bridgeport, UDC, Queens, and Mercy.
For Bridgeport, they lose Samuel Vonleh, who was the focal point for everything last year, and we'll have to see how they replace her. UDC's got some decent young players. They'll be in the playoff mix this year. Queens has got to take a step forward again and regenerate after losing the Rollins a few years ago and winning the regional, and Mercy's just trying to take some steps forward. So the last couple playoff spot or two, it's out there for somebody to take. I expect Malloy to jump over that line and get into the playoffs, but there's still another spot there, considering LIU Post is no longer part of the discussion in terms of active schools. So there's a window there for somebody to get to the ECC playoffs. Who it is? That's a good question.
How about the NE10 and a window for Assumption, St. Mike's, Franklin Pierce, Pace, or St. Rose?
Well, in the Northeast Division, with Merrimack gone, there's going to be an opening for a playoff team. I think Assumption is ahead of St. Michael's and Franklin Pierce at this point. No standout player, but pretty good depth, and they play really hard all the time. Franklin Pierce was so young last year, by the way, an entirely underclass roster. Some good freshmen as well, and they have a new old coach in Mark Swayze returning to take over the reins there. They could take a jump. I'm not sure if they're going to make the playoffs at this point. In the Southwest Division, AIC lost one of their greatest players ever in Dana Watts, and they're going to take some time to recover from that. Pace confounds me every single year, Tim. They have plenty of talent there, and why it hasn't clicked into place, I just have no idea. It could, but they're going to have to prove it first. And St. Rose has got to find a way to win games in February, because once they get to the end of January, they always seem to be right around 500 and in the playoff picture, and then they just completely drop
It's
off.
amazing. The last 2 years I was going through my notes. I had St. Rose in the top 12 going into January, and I think they've won a combined 3 games in February the last 2 seasons.
It's officially an issue.
It's a major. And if you go back 4 or 5 years, St. Rose never wins games in February. It is one of the most – and they have good wins in the first half of the season. Same roster. They don't win. They run out of gas just about every year. NCAA tournament time, Steve Areno. Who do you have?
Well, again, I said this is interesting. In the years that we've had the 8-team regional field, there have been at least 3 differences every year to year, except with one exception, when 7 of the 8 teams returned to the field in 2006 and 7. That might happen again this year.
Yeah.
The regional champion from last year, St. Anselm, I think they're back.
You have them as hosting the regional.
No, I have them back. I didn't say anything about hosting.
Okay, hosting.
I have them back.
We agree.
I mentioned them first because they won the regional and they deserve that respect.
We agree with St. A's, 100%.
Okay. Lemoyne.
100%.
I say they're definitely back in, a team that made it last year. And
last year we only disagreed on one. Could it be the same this year as well?
It's possible. You know, how great minds and all that. I'm not sure how that affects us.
Not much.
Okay, so we're 2 for 2. I see Bentley getting back in the field as well.
Correct. So far, you're 100%, Steve.
That's good. So are you, Tim. I see Stonehill getting back as well.
4 for 4.
Okay. I see Sciences getting back in.
5 for 5.
I see New York Tech getting
6
back
for
in.
6.
I see St. Thomas Aquinas
7 for 7.
And I see Adelphi taking that.
And that is where we change, because I put University of New Haven in.
Okay.
And I can totally see Adelphi getting there.
And I can totally see New Haven getting there.
Okay. That is amazing. So we both think that Bentley, Stonehill, St. A's, Lemoyne, Stack, New York Tech, and Sciences are all getting back in.
Here's the thing, Tim. St. Anselm won the regional last year as a 7 seed. And I think that might be a sign of things to come for this year. It's a very balanced group of teams. You can make a case for a lot of these teams to win the regional. So the seeding doesn't necessarily matter. It's going to be how well you're playing and I guess how healthy you are at the time of the NCAA tournament. There's not 1 or 2 teams I see here as clear-cut favorites and everybody else is chasing. I'm looking at 4 or 5, even 6 teams here. I look at and go, if things break for them, they can win the regional. That's what's going to make this year very interesting as we go along over the course of the next few months.
Who's your host? Who's your winner?
My host is Sciences. I think they win every game in the CACC, and I think they win enough non-league games against good opposition to rack up good numbers and host it. They did it last year, and even though I don't think they're as good as they were last year, I think they can do that again. I think the winner, though, is Lemoyne.
So you're half right. So
which half?
So I agree. First of all, in Sciences, it's a great pick. My pick last year. And I will say this about them. That Bentley Sciences game down in Philly, that's going to be what a matchup. It's a shame it has to happen so early in the season. But you're right. Lemoyne is going to win the regional this year, 100%. And they're also going to host it.
Okay.
So
Fair
Craig
enough.
Lane and the guys up at Lemoyne, go get him. You got another host job to do, according to me. So that wraps up this edition of the 2019-2020. It's going to be the only edition of the Regional Preview Podcast. Alongside Steve Zerdelian, I have been Tim McCaffrey and will be Tim McCaffrey following this podcast. We hope you stay tuned to d2easthoops.org for all the latest news and information coming up all season long. So long, everybody.